Welcome to week 7. This week we're looking at industry and cost structure of industry. So I'm actually going to take a look at the slides this week, which is something new. I normally do my own notes on just a Word document, but the slides are actually really helpful, and we're going to need this cost structure information for our analysis of firms in perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, and oligopoly. So this chapter is extremely applicable to the next several chapters that we are going to be covering, so stay tuned. The first thing we need to establish here is that we are going to assume that in economics, what we're looking at right now for firms is that they are profit maximizing, and that is their only goal. So they are going to seek to maximize profits, and profits being maximized equal to the difference of total revenues minus total costs. Our firm in perfect competition is going to be a firm that sells extremely similar products or homogeneous products. So from one firm to the next, we're talking about exactly the same product. They are going to be many small firms, so a large number of small firms. And also they're going to be price takers. At the total opposite end of the spectrum, we have monopoly. A monopolist is going to sell one product that is unique. There is no one else that sells that product, and therefore they take up the entire industry. I'm going to skip over that slide. So the next thing to look at are short-run concepts such as fixed and variable costs. So we're going to differentiate here between the short run and the long run. In the short run, we will have at least one fixed cost, and that fixed cost is often going to be the factory where goods and services are being produced, or some other aspect more related to services such as the size of the office building. We will vary some of our costs, and those would be called our variable costs. So those would be costs that as we increase production, the variable costs will vary. So as we produce more cupcakes in a cupcake factory, we're going to need more labor, and we're going to need more butter and sugar and flour. But the fixed cost of the firm, the size of the factory where the cupcake making is occurring, that is going to be a cost that occurs whether or not we are producing one cupcake or 1 million cupcakes, and we are not going to vary it in the short run. We will hold that factory fixed. So our fixed cost we are going to consider sunk, and that's sort of an important assumption. One thing to think about is that because we have a fixed cost in the short run, we will have diminishing returns to our marginal product. So variable cost will show these diminishing marginal returns given the following example. Say we have this factory, and in this factory we are making cupcakes. They require labor. They require people to make the cupcakes, and they require inputs such as flour, butter, and sugar. Now, if I add more flour, more butter, more sugar, and more labor, all of that labor is going to cost me the same amount. One unit of labor costs me the same amount per unit as the second unit, as the third unit, as the fourth unit, as the fifth or sixth or seventh worker. But I'm running out of space, and also the first bag of sugar costs the same amount as the second bag, or the third bag, or the fourth bag, or the fifth bag. And so as I add more bags of sugar and flour and butter and more workers, they cost the same amount, but they're actually not going to produce as many cupcakes because we're running out of space. This concept is what's called diminishing returns. So the marginal cost of producing higher levels of output rises. As we have diminishing returns to product, we have increasing marginal cost per unit. That last cupcake we make as we have 100 workers in a really cramped space with too many bags of sugar and flour, that cupcake is actually going to cost more because it's not going to be produced as efficiently as the first or second cupcake, or third, or some optimal level would. So remember this concept of variable costs, meaning that as we add variable units of our inputs to a fixed factory sized or some fixed cost that is not changing, this will demonstrate diminishing marginal returns, and diminishing marginal returns are indicative of increased marginal costs per unit. So therefore, if we look at our total cost curve, we can see that if we take the derivative or look at a tangent to any point along our total cost curve, we will come up with our marginal cost curve. Our marginal cost curve being the change in total cost per unit of output. So initially, our total cost, if you look at that tangent, is actually falling. But then at some point where our total costs are lowest, where our marginal cost per unit around here is lowest, our total cost per unit, so the tangent, is actually going to rise. And so our total cost curve, when we look at marginal cost, is going to help us understand our marginal cost, because the tangent to the total cost curve is how we come up with our marginal cost curve. So marginal cost is calculated by taking the change in total cost and dividing by the change in output. So marginal cost will typically be rising for a firm. This is because as we add variable inputs to our fixed input, just like in the cupcake example, we add more labor, we add more ingredients into the mix. They're not going to help us out as much because we're constrained by the fact that we're operating in a factory that's as a fixed size. It has a fixed amount of capital, for example, a fixed amount of ovens. And if we add more labor, it's just costing us more. They're not really making that many more cupcakes because everybody's crowded and there's only a certain amount of ovens and capital equipment to work with. So marginal costs will be typically rising because of these fixed costs that do exist, like the factory size. Average total cost and average variable cost are very important for you to be able to calculate. I highly recommend reviewing that material. Now, one thing to take a look at is your marginal cost and your average total cost curve. Always remember that your marginal cost curve intersects your average total cost curve at its lowest the lowest point on the average total cost curve. Average total costs are therefore going to be above average variable costs, and the difference between your average total costs will be your average fixed cost. This is also demonstrated by the equation average total cost equals average variable cost plus average fixed cost. And everything we've discussed is in the short run. Now, economies of scale refer to the long run. So let's real quick take a look at what our long run average cost curve looks like. So here is our short run average total cost curve, or one of them. Here is another short run average total cost. Now, let's think about the bakery example again. If we're making cupcakes and our factory is of this size, perhaps the lowest point on our short-run average total cost curve is here. But maybe if we increase our factory size, we hire more workers, we have more ovens, we have better equipment, we can have more people doing different jobs. So I could, for example, have someone just frosting the cupcakes, someone adding the ingredients into a bowl, and someone mixing them. Or maybe I could even at this point or this point have machinery that does that instead of having humans do it. I can produce at a lower average cost. If my factory is this size, maybe we're going to be running into some issues. We call these diseconomies of scale. So in this beginning section of our long run average cost curve, which traces the minimum point of all of our different factory sizes or our short run average total cost curves, we experience what are called economies of scale. Economies of scale will occur due to the specialization of human capital and physical capital. So, economies of scale refer to a situation where all inputs increase at a certain rate, the quantity of output rises at a faster rate. So we're experiencing efficiencies, we're experiencing lower average costs. In the constant returns to scale situation, as we add certain outputs at a certain rate, the quantity of output rises at the same rate. And we will have long run average costs not changing in this portion of the average cost curve, average total cost curve. In the far side of our long run average cost curve, when we get too big, we might actually experience some negative impacts from having so much output. And I would attribute most of these to bureaucratic inefficiencies. So our diseconomies of scale mean that all inputs increase at a certain rate, the quantity of output rises at a slower rate due to those higher long-run average costs that sometimes occur due to the bureaucratic nature of larger firms. So the long-run average cost curve shows the lowest possible average cost of production, allowing all inputs of production to vary. So there is nothing fixed in the long run. All of your inputs become variable. So in conclusion, I would say make sure you understand the difference between the short run and the long run. The short run being the time period in which you must hold some costs or inputs fixed. And when you hold those costs or inputs fixed, you can have diminishing returns to your product, which causes increasing marginal costs. So increasing marginal costs will be something that the firm faces in the short run. And therefore, you're going to maximize your profit where total revenues minus total cost is greatest. So it's not necessarily where total revenues are greatest or where total costs are minimized, but the difference between total revenues and total cost is maximized. That will be where a firm is maximizing profit. And know that in the long run, we will vary all of our inputs. So there will not be this issue with diminishing marginal returns to product or increasing marginal costs. We will have a long run average cost curve that is generally lower than that of our short run average total cost curve, where we might benefit from economies of scale and constant returns to scale, but where we do not want to produce where there are diseconomies of scale. So please contact me if you have any questions about this material. I haven't directly lectured on all of it, but I did want to hit on the important and sometimes confusing points.